The Chicago Bulls possibly just got a big ding in their search for a trade partner for Zach LaVine, as Woj has now reported that there's not a big trade market to no trade market for Zach LaVine. What does that mean for the team and more? We're talking about it all and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. And I'm bringing the news. You guys know when news drops, I drop. And we got another news, this time coming from Woj, in which he talked about Zach LaVine, the Bulls just not finding a trade market for Zach LaVine. And this kind of makes some sense, right? When you look at Zach LaVine's contract, you know, this isn't just about the December 15th date. A lot of common thought has been, yeah, you're not going to have a big trade market right now because you're waiting until December 15th when more players become eligible. And then you have January 15th when more players become eligible there even after that. But this seems more about Zach LaVine and his impact on winning. And that is something that is a bigger hit to the trade market for Zach LaVine, is that teams are questioning if Zach LaVine contributes enough to winning. Pair that with the size of his contract. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and play the clip from Woj now.
But back here with our senior NBA insider, Adrian Wojnarowski. Woj, is there a market for LaVine here?
There is not a market for Zach LaVine right now in the NBA, and that's not because Chicago has not tried to find it and aren't currently trying to find it. And it's a combination of a few reasons. LaVine's contract, 4 more years at around a $45-46 million a year average, but his productivity. And I think this is a player right now who certainly he's out now with a foot injury. He's been in and out of the lineup. And I think the question for teams is, how much does Zach LaVine impact winning, especially at the salary and with a new salary cap where you're asking yourself, are we trading for him to be our best player? No. Our second best player? No. So if he's our third best player, do we want to pay that kind of money? And for the Bulls, they want to get some value in a trade. I think right now, for both LaVine and the Bulls, to get a trade, he needs to start playing well. He needs to start playing well, and I think impacting winning. And I think that's certainly what teams are going to want to see as they look at the value of trying to do a trade for him.
Right, and so we could see his value increase if he starts to play maybe a little bit better, a little bit differently. Not to mention it's incredibly rare when you look historically to see any of these sorts of deals done in the month of December. It really just doesn't happen very often, Woj.
It doesn't happen very often. We really haven't had one for a couple of years.
Yeah.
A lot more players become eligible to be traded December 15th, January 15th. But teams are still trying to figure out who they are.
Yeah.
And where they are going to land heading in toward the trade deadline in February. But certainly, usually there's a little more conversation going on among teams, just lobbing calls and trading ideas than I'm hearing right now around the league.
So for now, we sit and we wait, maybe even until we get out of the month of December. Woj, thank you.
And so everything that Woj said there makes sense. And we kind of touched on that a little bit in the daily episode today. This is the third episode for today now. But we touched on that briefly, is that if teams are seeing the Bulls play better over this week with Zach LaVine, best believe a lot of teams are going to be watching how the Bulls perform now without Zach LaVine on the floor. Because if the team looks like they're operating better as a cohesive unit, doesn't even necessarily mean wins. Teams are going to use that as leverage in any trade talks, or if that just takes them completely out of their desire for trading Zach LaVine. Yes, Zach puts up numbers. We all know that Zach can absolutely fill it up. But Zach has one of the worst winning percentages in the game of basketball. Now, is that all on him? No. I'm not going to change my stance on that. He's been on terrible teams for the most part for his NBA career. But you have to ask those type of questions. If you're going to be paying somebody for 4 more years and over $40 million each one of those years, you have to ask yourself, are they going to impact winning enough for it to move the needle for us? Yeah, you can have players that put up a bunch of stats. That doesn't necessarily mean that it impacts winning in a meaningful way, and especially a team looking to take on a $40 million contract is probably looking at hopefully that being the piece that may put them over the top. So hearing that the Chicago Bulls are now finding it difficult to find a trade partner for Zach LaVine, to be quite honest, it sucks because that is going to either cause one of two things. We may very well go through this trade deadline where if AK doesn't feel like he gets a deal that is respectful, we may just have to hold on to Zach. And then what does that continue to do for team chemistry, especially if these young players continue to flash stuff? Again, one game, we don't know for sure yet, but continue to flash better play without Zach LaVine on the court. Then when you add into that, another thing that could happen is that the Bulls could just end up having to take whatever the best offer is. And when you have teams that don't want to trade for Zach, or you don't have a market that is competitive, you're not going to get the best deal. And so the Bulls find themselves between a rock and a hard place when it comes to the Zach LaVine trade. Now, there's still time, and maybe it changes. And even in that clip, Woj said the best thing for all parties involved is for Zach LaVine to get on the court and to play well. And so hopefully when Zach LaVine does come back from his injury, we see a Zach LaVine that is more apt to playing within the structure of the game, and also not any more of the 9. Now, one thing could go wrong that way too, because the last thing you want is Zach LaVine to come out trying to prove his worth and his value, and he's just shooting, and it's terrible, and it's bad for the chemistry of the team. But if you can get Zach LaVine playing well, showing that he can impact winning, stepping up in meaningful games and getting wins in those games, teams aren't going to be the wool pulled over their eyes by seeing the 51-point performances in losses if they have this type of questions around the performance of Zach LaVine. So when it comes down to it, the Bulls and Zach LaVine need Zach LaVine on the court between now and January, between now and the trade deadline, basically, right? Because we're not going to put any more arbitrary dates. Between now and whenever the trade happens, they need Zach to get healthy, get back on the court, and to be playing well. And then one thing we didn't talk about it as well is Zach LaVine and the injury concerns. He's had an injury that has kept him out or has hobbled him each of the last 3 seasons. Now, after his ACL surgery, he had a few seasons in there with no major injuries. But basically, since he went down against the Warriors in that same game Lonzo went down in, it's just these little nagging injuries, the thumb, the back, the whatever, now the foot. So at the end of the day, if the Bulls do find the lack of a trade marker for Zach LaVine, this thing could go throughout the rest of the season, and it could go even further than that. And so eventually something's going to have to give, and it probably means that the Bulls may have to take a bad deal on Zach LaVine. But let's hope that it doesn't get to that, and we see a Zach LaVine that comes back now that this is all out there and this conversation's out there, that is locked in and plays, because that is best for him, that is best for the team. Otherwise, Zach is going to have to suck it up and still be here on a Bulls team that he may just fall out of being prioritized, and then at that point, you're not going anywhere. But the words that Woj said are kind of damning there. It's tough to hear, and we'll see how that ends up playing off for Zach LaVine. Let me know your thoughts as always down below. Make sure you're following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can hit us at bullcentralpod@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments, concerns. And then if you want to leave a voicemail to sound off on this or any other topic, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the #1 spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.